Hello, this is Carl Irwin with another Blender tutorial. This is episode 4 in the Hacking the Viewport series that I've been putting out recently. And considering that this is episode 4, I thought it would be appropriate that we do a little bit of a Star Wars action here. And the video that we're going to look at today is this one, which is just a short little clip of one of the most recognizable spaceships in science fiction. This is the Millennium Falcon original trilogy version. You can see with the radar array up here on top, and pretty simple little animation here. We're going to do something very different. There's maybe some of you that are looking at some of these tutorials in the series and thinking that it's not quite for you. You would prefer to use other compositing type techniques and use render passes to have a little bit more control in your compositions and control to change things in your compositions. And we're going to take a bit of a sidestep here in our series and look at the possibility of creating various render passes using OpenGL rather than compositing a full scene in the viewport, compositing individual passes instead that can but then be composited separately and later. And the reason why we would do this in the viewport is so that we can render these passes again very, very quickly and efficiently at very high speed, which again is the benefit of the rendering in the viewport using OpenGL and GLSL. So again, what you're looking at here in this video is actually not a real-time render from the viewport, but rather various OpenGL passes that were individually rendered from the viewport and then were composited separately in the video sequence editor, or you could use any compositor that you choose. And again, every single pass to make up this video is an OpenGL render pass. So there's nothing in here that was rendered separately outside of OpenGL. So let's take a look at what's going on here. This is going to be just sort of a short breakdown tutorial. We're not going to look at a lot of the detail and shading. We're just going to look at the concept of creating various passes using the OpenGL viewport rendering capability. So let's take a look at the file. This is the original file, and you can see here in the viewport we have the simple animation, and here's our Millennium Falcon moving. And actually, let me quickly show you where I got this model from. If we take a quick look here, I downloaded this from a website, sci-fi3d.com, and they actually had a section on here of a bunch of Star Wars related models, and these are all, I think, mostly free. They do require, they have a license on them, however, and they require that you give credit, so I want to do that right now. I downloaded this one here, the second. There's 3 versions of the Millennium Falcon here, and this is version 2. It's only a 7 megabyte model, and I downloaded the 3DS model, which you can import into Blender. There were some issues with the import. Some parts of the mesh were a little bit out of alignment. I had to do a little bit of tweaking, and I had to also map all of the textures to it. But it was a pretty nice grab here for making a short little fan-based kind of video. And again, this is a fan-based model, so it's not something that you really could use in a commercial product or presentation without getting sued by Disney. So I would recommend that you not do that. This is only appropriate for fan-type footage, and you want to make sure that you give credit back here to the authors. And the original model is by Ivan Connery, and textures by Sebastian Hirsch, and downloaded at sci-fi3d.com. So that's my little plug here for that model. Also, while I'm here, I want to point out we're using Blender 2.72b, and we're actually using the Gooseberry project version branch, and you can find that download by going to the Blender website, going to the Get Involved section. You click on Software, and it will take you to kind of a developer's information page. And in here, underneath what's happening, it says download daily builds. And if you click on that, it will take you to a page where you can download all of the daily builds of this version 2.72. And then there's actually a little section down here that has the Gooseberry branch. And the Gooseberry project is the current animation project that is being worked on at the Blender Foundation. So what they're doing in this branch is a number of different things, but one of the things that they're working on in the creation of this animation, this new open movie animation, is working on Blender's Viewport, and they've added a few features recently, and these branch updates come out almost every single day. So you can see actually even from earlier in the day, there's a new one for Sunday here, which is must be a European-based upload, because it's still actually Saturday evening here in the United States. But there's a new one almost every single day here. I'm using the Linux 64-bit version. You can download this for Windows, Mac, or Linux and get some of those new features. It's a little bit hit or miss sometimes with these, because sometimes some of the features won't work quite right, and you'll have to wait another day or two for a corrected version to come out. But you can check that out and get some of the features that we're going to be looking at today to render out some of these passes. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to render out a pass that has flat shading. So if you look here at the model, I'm not going to talk really about how to do shadeless lighting. I'm going to spend an entire episode later on to talk about how to do that. I have some tutorials also on my YouTube channel that discuss that a little bit if you want to get into that sort of thing now. But we will spend some time on the original space project that we were looking at with the planet and the asteroids and the nebula and all that, and we'll talk about how to do some shadeless lighting. I just want to focus on the concept of render passes. So this is a flat shaded shadeless model here, and you can see that there's some things missing. Because it's flat shaded, we can see all of the faces, and it looks a little gamey. Actually, it looks a lot gamey, but there's some truth to it, in that you can see these panels are showing the creases, which would be authentic to a ship like this. It would be made out of flat panels. And also we can see the shadow that's been created here using some texturing techniques and shadeless texturing techniques. And it looks okay. It looks kind of low-res, gamey sort of appearance to it, and that's okay. So this is a flat version. Now, I made a copy of this scene, and we'll look at this one over here, which is a smooth shaded version. We'll let this load in. You'll have to pardon my coughing here. I have been getting over a cold for about a month, and I'm still kind of hacking away. This is a smooth shaded version of it, and to change that, all we have to do is change the shading mode here, and you can see that it shows kind of a softer shading to it, and this also has a great deal of truth to it in its presentation, but it's not the whole picture. And we're going to render out a pass like this as well. Okay, so we would render out a video of the first one, we'd render out a video of this second one here, and you'd see it's just a couple of seconds per frame with the background and everything. And if we go back to the 3D viewport, we're going to render out another pass, which is the background. So I have another version of the scene, and we render this one out just as the background to it. Now on the other passes, I render the background with it, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a mask, and you'll see the mask here. This is another scene that I made, so that we can lift the ship off of the background and then place it onto just the background plate. But the reason that I render the background with those other passes is so that when we use the mask, if there's a little bit of fringing that's going on, we can still get a really clean composite because we're lifting some of the elements from that background onto it. We're going to avoid that common issue with masking that you can end up sometimes with little fringes and halo pieces that are sticking out, and doing it this way will alleviate that. Now, this is another scene. It's another copy of the scene, and what we did is I took the mist feature and I made the background entirely white, and I set the mist feature for this model I'm not going to talk greatly about this, but I set it to a really low amount so that it started at 0, and the depth is only 1 blender unit, and that would essentially make everything absolutely white. Now, the other way I could have done this is I could have just put a white material on the model, but to make this a little bit quicker, I just used this method here. So you could render then this out as a render pass, and you generate a video of the ship moving as just this white mask that we're going to use for compositing later on. And also I made a glow. So we'll look at this one here, and this is just an element that has the thruster section, or you can see it right here, is made white, and we can render this out as well, and then blur it later on. Now, another trick is to use some of these new features. So the Gooseberry project has added ambient occlusion and depth of field effects to the viewport, and they are very good for previewing. However, they still suffer a little bit of resolution issues. So these are not really useful for full renders as we're trying to do from the viewport, not yet anyway. I'm sure that that will get better with time. But these could be useful for previewing, or in this case to render out a simple render pass. So if I click on the depth of field and I enable it, you can see that it blurs out our image here and creates kind of a Gaussian blur. And the way that I did this is I just set my camera values to have an f-stop of 0, which would be a lot of light into the lens if this was a real camera, and that's what generates this blurring in focal depth of field, focal point depth of field kinds of effects. And I set my focal length down here to 1, so it essentially just blurs out everything. Now I could render this out as a single render pass, and I could use it that way, or if I wanted to, I could use something that I've overlooked in recent builds. I didn't even realize it was in there until just yesterday. There has now been added a Gaussian blur add-on effect to the video sequence editor, which is really, really cool. Now, it suffers a major flaw in that it works extremely painfully slowly if you enable the blur on the X and the Y axis at the same time in the same effect. So the workaround to that, and we'll look at that later, is to just add one instance of the blur and blur one axis, and then add a second instance of the blur and blur the opposite axis, and that works pretty well. So we'll look at that in a little bit. But anyway, this is a glow pass, so another render pass here. The next one that we're going to do is the ambient occlusion, and this is where things get really kind of tricky. As I said, they've added ambient occlusion and a depth of field to the capabilities in the viewport, and they're not very good yet with respect to resolution and output. But what we can do is we can enable the depth of field. In fact, let me do this real quick. I want to go back to the we'll go back to the flat version. I just want you to see this ambient occlusion in action and understand exactly what's happening here before I show you how we'll utilize it. On this one, if I enable ambient occlusion, you can see how it's made all of this white color here in the places where there should be ambient occlusion. And the reason why it's white is because I have the color set to white. Now, if I turn this to black, you would see that it would generate the appropriate shadow kind of image here. And you can see how much better it makes it look already. We're going to use this a little bit differently because, as I said, if we render like this, you can see that there's a lot of flaws in it. And it also renders very slowly. And another issue with this is that I found that the ambient occlusion renders only if depth of field is also enabled. And you can set your depth of field camera settings so that there's no blur at all by setting your f-stop extremely high and keeping the focal length low. But that renders very slowly. You might as well be using the internal render engine at that point. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a little bit of a trick here. We're going to set our color all the way up to white. And if I go back to the ambient occlusion layer, what I've done is I've made my ship shadeless so that it's black, or rather, I made it shaded with no lights in the scene, so that it automatically turns to black. Now, the ambient occlusion effect does not accept lights anyway. It is a shadeless effect. So what I can do is I can set my ambient occlusion color to white. I set it to high quality. I disable the background, and if I enable my depth of field, because there's no background image in there, it's just the sky, it won't render very slowly. It'll render much more quickly, and you can see if I render one frame. Now I have a few other processes working because I'm capturing this tutorial, but you can see it takes a couple of seconds and I render a relatively high resolution mask for ambient occlusion that we can use as a render pass. And you can see that the resolution does suffer some issues with anti-aliasing, but it's okay. That's one of the benefits to separating this out as a separate render pass, is that we can use the other high resolution flat and smooth shading passes, and then apply this with kind of a low opacity as an effect in the compositor or the video sequence editor, and we should still retain a lot of that great detail. So this isn't going to be a very overbearing effect. It's not a big deal that the resolution suffers some problems. But anyway, so we render out a video with ambient occlusion now using this new tool. And let me go back to the 3D viewport. I think I've got everything there. Flat, smooth, mask, background, ambient occlusion. Yes, everything's there. So let's go now to the video sequence editor. And you can see here I have a composite put together with everything on here. Oh, I did forget one thing. Let me go back real quick. I did forget some other layers. I also made a contrail front. So these are two separate, let me turn off my depth of field and ambient occlusion effect. So these are actually just videos. They are, in fact, let me show you here real quick what I made. So this is the contrail video that I made, and it's just a particle system. And you can see that these are just icosphere objects that were blurred out in the video sequence editor, and I just made this a quick particle system kind of asset, and I applied a poor man's interpolated frame motion blur effect to it. And I made two versions of this video. I made one that looks like this, and then I also made another one that is the alpha mask. It's the same video, it's just that it's completely white. And then what I did is I applied these both of these textures in the scene here as a video with the alpha transparency enabled, and it is parented to my Falcon model. And you can see as this moves through the scene that it's blowing off this contrail effect off to the left side of the frame. So this is the front version, and then I also made another scene with the back version. So these are two separate scenes. Now, I did not render this out separately. I just let these go as scenes, and we're going to composite these as scenes into the video sequence editor. Now, I could have rendered these out as an image sequence with alpha transparency enabled, but it's a little bit quicker and easier, especially with something so simple as this. We don't have to worry about the anti-aliasing and blocky kind of feel to it, because it's a pretty blurry, quick effect, and the opacity is going to be very low anyway in compositing. So we're just going to use these as scenes. So let's go now to the video sequence editor again, and you can see I've composited everything together, and I'll show you how we do that here in a moment. I have my background image, I have my contrail back, which is a scene layer. So this is scene actually is a scene from the viewport. This is not pre-rendered. Then I have here a meta strip made up of all of my other assets that are composited together. I have my the mask is applied here so that it separates the ship from the rest of the background. In fact, if I disable this meta strip here, you can see that the ship should disappear. Give it a second to fall out. We still see the glow, but the ship is gone. We'll bring it back. That's because it's being applied by that one mask pass that we made. I can also apply to this, in addition to the mask that's on here, a curve correction, color curve correction to set it into the scene a little bit better. I have my glow effect applied a couple of different ways on here with some blue coloring added to it. and then an adjustment layer just to take some of the contrast out of this so that we can get a really clean pass. And you can see how all of these passes have merged together to generate this more correct shadowing. We have the flat shadowing, have the smooth shadowing, and we also have the ambient occlusion shadowing going on in here. So let me show you very briefly how this would go. I'm going to add quickly let me add a color here just so that we can sort of block everything out, and I'll show you how to composite some of these elements together. So for example, if we add to this a movie, we'll go to our passes, and I'm going to add the flat one, and you can see it here. Here's our flat version, and then on top of that I'm going to add our smooth shaded version here. And on the smooth shaded version, you can see here I'm going to change the opacity to 0.5. And you can see what happens. Now it's taking half of the flat and half of the smooth. See, this is without the smooth. This is with the smooth, and you can see that we get a little bit more of a realistic shading on there. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color to it. So we'll just add a simple color. And what I'm going to do, I'll turn the opacity down for a second. I'm going to go to this color, and I'm going to change the color to, let's say, a dark blue color from the background here. We'll darken this way down, really, really dark, so that our shadows will match some of the other shadows that are on the falcon here. And we will enable our color again. And let's add a mask. We will add the ambient occlusion mask to this. Here's our ambient occlusion mask. We will turn it off. I'll select my color again, and to the color I'll add a mask modifier. And in the mask modifier I'm going to select my mask for the ambient occlusion. You can see that it is now applying all the white areas of my ambient occlusion pass to this color. Now all I need to do is set my color channel to be alpha over, and it will apply now this ambient occlusion layer to my smooth and flat shading. So very quickly, once again, we have flat added with smooth, added with ambient occlusion, and we get this kind of final result. Now, in addition, I could add my mask layer to this to pull this, the mask layer for the full ship, to pull it off of the background, and then I can add a color correction to that, and I can composite it together in that way, add my glow effect and all those other things in a very similar way. So you can see how this can work together. Okay. Now I would render this out, and I'll just show you what my final output was again. Get rid of all of this stuff we just added. And give it a second. So this is my final output, low contrast, so that we can do a little bit more color grading later on. I render this out as a video, and then I opened up a secondary composite layer, and this is where we put everything all together. Now, in here I added some other effects as well. There is a lens flare, and what I did is I generated a pass, a lens flare pass, using my OpenGL lens flare kit that you can download at BlendSwap, the GL Flares 2 rig, and that looks like, if I can find it here, looks like this. So I just keyframe animated this to the pass, and I made this as a separate render layer, and I can import this into my scene on top of everything else. I also added a poor man's motion blur here using some frame interpolation techniques, and you can look at the episode 2, I believe. I look at that a little bit and demonstrate how to do that in this series. And I also applied a Gaussian blur, and you can find this now in the effect strip capabilities here in the video sequence editor. Here it is. And what you need to do is it won't apply very well a blur using both the X and Y axis together in the same effect. So what you need to do is you need to apply this to an adjustment layer. If you want to apply it to everything, you add an adjustment layer and then apply this to that adjustment layer. This is applied to a single layer. It's not applied to everything but to a single layer. And you set your one axis, and then you need to apply another one, and you apply this layer using the opposite axis to the Gaussian blur layer below. So if you see how this works, the input layer on the first Gaussian blur is the adjustment layer. The input layer on the second one is the first Gaussian blur layer, and it will meld these together and give you the effect that you want on both axes. Now, the reason why I did this was just to soften up some of the anti-aliasing issues that we had with a couple of those render passes, and it just makes it look a little bit more believable, more film-like, to add just a 2-pixel motion or 2-pixel Gaussian blur to that. So we composite all this together. I added the flare pass here. We added a little bit more glow. I added a vignette to it. I also did a little bit of offset. I added some noise to get some film grain in there. So some of it is added noise, some of it is subtracted noise. Again, I've covered this in other tutorials in the past. We're not going to spend time on it. And then I add a color grading adjustment layer, and then to finish it off, I add on a little letterbox overlay that I created for this resolution. And then we just output our final video, and we end up with what you see here. And so that's how it's all put together. Now, one thing you need to be aware of is that when you are putting scenes in, and this is not using any scenes, this is using final pre-rendered output. But for my first composite, when I was using my scenes for the contrail, you need to make sure from the video sequence editor that you're rendering using the OpenGL render buttons, and you have it set to OpenGL preview with the texture enabled, because if you try to use the internal buttons with scenes, it will actually try to render it using the internal render engine first, and that takes forever. So you want to make sure that you're using OpenGL render buttons if you're using scenes. Now in my second composite, because it's pre-rendered sequences, I can now use my internal render button, and it renders very, very quickly and efficiently. So anyway, just some thoughts and some ideas there with respect to using the Viewport to generate high-speed rendering render passes for compositing later, and just another use for the Viewport for those of you who are more interested in that kind of compositing rather than trying to fit everything into the Viewport. Now there are going to be ways to do some of this ambient occlusion. We're going to look at that and some other effects, some limited ways to do that. We'll look at that in future episodes, but I just wanted to present you with some of these ideas here that you could play around and work with. So that's all I have for you for this episode. I hope that this is very helpful, and I hope that you find a use for it, and I wish all of you the best and happy blending.